On a freezing winter night in Colorado, a lonely veteran walked through the snow with his loyal German shepherd. He thought it would be just another cold, quiet evening, but everything changed when his dog suddenly stopped and led him toward two tiny shapes hiding against a wall, a little girl trembling in a thin green jacket, and her older brother trying to shield her with nothing but his arms. What happened next? No one in town could have imagined. Some call it fate. Some call it a miracle. But everyone who's seen this story agrees it's something you'll never forget. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? I'd love to know. And if you enjoy heartwarming stories like this, please consider subscribing. Winter nights in rural Colorado were never gentle, but tonight the cold felt unusually merciless. The small mountain town of Silver Pine lay buried under a thick blanket of snow, its wooden houses nearly invisible behind drifting white. Street lamps flickered under the weight of frozen ice, glowing dimly through the swirling storm. The wind carved along the empty streets like a living thing, sharp enough to cut through clothes, skin, and bone. Every sound was muffled, swallowed by the heaviness of falling snow, leaving the whole town quiet in a way that felt almost forgotten by the world. Through this blinding storm trudged two tiny figures. Ethan, a thin 10-year-old boy with deep hazel eyes dulled by exhaustion, wore a torn yellow t-shirt beneath a frayed gray hoodie. His dark brown hair was messy and frozen at the tips, clinging to his forehead as the icy wind whipped at him. Next to him, Lily, his 7-year-old sister with sandy blonde tangled hair and small blue eyes, struggled to keep up. She clutched at her oversized, threadbare jacket, a garment so thin that the wind sliced through it as though it were barely there. Their cheeks were red from windburn, their lips pale, their small bodies shaking violently. For days, the siblings had wandered all over Silver Pine searching for food. Ethan had sifted through trash bins behind diners, digging through paper cups and cardboard boxes with trembling fingers. He had tried asking for work at several shops, but adults shut their doors the moment they saw his tattered clothes. Some shouted for him to leave. Others simply looked away, as if the existence of two starving children was too heavy a burden to acknowledge. Even begging had failed them. People hurried by, tightening scarves and coats, pretending not to hear Ethan's polite, desperate requests. Lily had cried silently more than once, but Ethan always wiped her tears quickly before anyone saw, trying to protect what little dignity they still had. Now, as night deepened and the storm worsened, Ethan knew Lily couldn't walk much farther. Her steps had slowed, becoming clumsy and uncertain. Every few meters she stumbled, and Ethan had to catch her by the shoulders. He scanned the snow-covered street until he spotted a narrow alley between a bakery and a hardware store. The bakery belonged to Mrs. Sarah Henson, a tall, slender woman in her early 50s, known for her strict demeanor and sharp features. Her brown hair, streaked with silver, was always tied in a bun, and though she looked stern, she was the type who quietly slipped extra pastries to elderly customers who couldn't afford lunch. But tonight, her shop was dark, closed early because of the storm, and she had gone home long ago. Ethan didn't dare disturb her. He guided Lily into the alley and brushed snow from the ground with his sleeve. The brick wall blocked some of the wind, but not enough. Ethan sat down and pulled Lily close, wrapping his arms tightly around her small frame. "I'm so cold," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know," Ethan murmured, forcing warmth into his tone despite his shaking voice. "I'll keep you warm, I promise." But he had no warmth left. His fingers were numb, his face stung with icy needles, and each breath burned his lungs. Snow piled around them quickly, settling on their hair and shoulders like a silent threat. Lily's head grew heavier against Ethan's chest. Her breathing slowed. Panic twisted in Ethan's stomach. "Lily? Hey, keep your eyes open. We're okay. I'm right here." But his words trembled with fear. Minutes stretched painfully. The storm swallowed the street whole. Ethan pressed his cheek to Lily's hair, praying for morning, for warmth, for anything. Then, footsteps. A faint crunching sound grew louder, pressing through the wind. Ethan lifted his head, blinking through the snow. A large shadow approached from the far end of the alley. Then another. As they moved closer, shapes became clearer. A tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a heavy olive-green military field jacket, and beside him a powerful German shepherd with thick tan and black fur. Snow clung to the dog's back, and its intelligent brown eyes scanned the alley carefully, alert to the smallest movement. The dog looked around 6 years old, strong, disciplined, well-trained, and it trotted forward with purpose, nose twitching as it caught the scent of the freezing children. The man followed, stepping into the faint glow of the street lamp. He had rugged, weathered features, strong jawline, high cheekbones, and a neatly trimmed beard dusted with frost. His short dark brown hair held strands of gray, and his skin was light tan with the natural texture of someone who had spent years facing harsh elements. But it was his eyes, deep-set, tired, and impossibly sad, that drew Ethan's attention. A kind of grief lived in them, quiet but heavy, as if he carried a weight he could never put down. His name was Michael, though the children did not know it yet. He was 45, a former Marine Corps veteran who had survived many harsh winters and battlefields. But the worst pain he had ever felt came 2 years ago, when his wife and young daughter died in a car accident. He had been the one behind the wheel. Since then, guilt and sorrow had hollowed him out. He walked Silver Pine's streets most nights unable to sleep, accompanied only by his loyal German shepherd, the last living connection to the family he had lost. Tonight, he had walked farther than usual, wandering without direction, until his dog suddenly froze, ears perked, and tugged on the leash. Michael followed, trusting the dog's instincts as he always did. Now, standing before Ethan and Lily, Michael's eyes widened with shock and heartbreak. 2 children, half frozen, alone. The dog stepped forward first, lowering its head to sniff Lily gently before pressing its warm body against her side. Michael dropped to his knees. Hey, it's okay," he said softly, voice breaking. "You're safe. I've got you." He removed his thick jacket and wrapped it around both children with trembling hands. For the first time in 2 years, something inside Michael shifted, a faint, fragile spark breaking through the cold walls around his heart. And in that dark alley, under a storm of falling snow, fate quietly brought together 3 souls who desperately needed one another. Michael knelt in the snow for a long moment, steadying his breath as the cold stung his cheeks and the weight of the scene pressed upon him. Ethan and Lily huddled inside his thick jacket, shivering but conscious, their small faces peeking out with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The German shepherd, whose name was Ranger, leaned gently against them, his warm fur pressed close to their sides. Ranger was a strong, disciplined dog, about 6 years old, with a muscular frame built from years of outdoor training. His tan and black coat was thick and well-maintained, and his deep brown eyes carried a calm intelligence that often sensed danger long before Michael did. He nudged Lily with his nose, checking her temperature, then settled beside Ethan as if claiming responsibility for their safety. Michael rose to his feet, his breath fogging the air as he glanced back toward the main road. "Ranger, stay," he murmured, and the dog obeyed instantly. The command was soft, but carried years of trust woven into it. Michael hurried down the snow-covered street toward the nearest convenience store. Though shops were closing early due to the storm, one small gas station store remained open, its neon sign flickering against the swirling snow. Inside, the clerk on duty was a man in his late 20s named Todd Harker. Todd was short and slightly round, with curly auburn hair and freckles scattered across his pale skin. He wore a heavy flannel jacket and looked perpetually tired, as though life had worn him down earlier than it should have. Despite his weary appearance, Todd was patient by nature, shaped by the loss of his older brother in a hiking accident years ago. That grief made him softer toward others. He understood what it meant to carry silent burdens. Michael approached the counter holding instant soup cups, a loaf of bread, hot chocolate packets, and 2 small hand warmers. Todd raised an eyebrow. "Cold night to be out, huh?" "Found 2 kids," Michael replied quietly, placing the items down. "They're freezing." Todd's eyes widened with alarm. "Kids? Out there? Alone?" He quickly bagged the items and pushed an extra pair of gloves into the bag. "Here, on the house." Michael hesitated, but Todd shook his head firmly. "Just go help them, man." Michael nodded gratefully, then rushed back into the storm. When he reached the alley again, Ranger was still curled protectively around the children, his ears perked as he watched Michael return. Ethan's eyes lit with faint relief. Lily blinked sleepily, but stirred at the smell of warm food. Michael knelt and opened the soup containers, letting the rising steam warm the air around them. He lifted a spoon to Lily's lips, guiding her gently. Her hands shook too much to feed herself. Ethan tried to hold his own portion, but his fingers slipped, so Michael steadied the cup for him. As they ate, Michael spoke softly. "My name is Michael," he said. "And this big guy here is Ranger." Ethan looked at the dog with awe. Ranger wagged his tail gently, lowering his head for the boy to pat. Lily reached out with her small hand, touching the dog's fur as though afraid it might disappear. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, voice hoarse. Michael felt something tighten in his chest. Their gratitude was so pure, so fragile, that it pierced straight through the barriers grief had built around him. When they finished eating, Lily leaned against Michael's side, exhausted. Ethan fought to stay awake, but his eyelids drooped. The storm showed no sign of letting up, and the temperature had dropped further. It would be dangerous, deadly, to leave the children here any longer. Michael took a slow breath, feeling the weight of his decision, yet knowing he had already made it the moment he saw them. "I'm taking you home," he said gently. "Just for tonight. It's warmer there." Ethan hesitated. We won't cause trouble." "You're not trouble," Michael said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice surprised even him. He lifted Lily into his arms, carefully wrapping her inside the jacket. Ethan followed closely, putting his cold hand into Ranger's thick fur for support. Ranger walked beside him, keeping his pace slow and steady. They stepped back onto the main street, trudging through falling snow as Silverpine's quiet houses blurred around them. Michael's cabin was a short walk away, just beyond the last row of shops, near the tree line where the forest began. As they approached, the warm glow of his porch light shone faintly through the storm, a humble beacon in the darkness. Ethan glanced at it with wonder. Lily, half asleep in Michael's arms, murmured softly, comforted by the warmth she had not felt in far too long. Michael felt a strange warmth rise in his chest, too, something he hadn't felt since the loss of his own family. Hope. And he didn't yet know it. But this night would mark the beginning of a new chapter for all four of them. Michael pushed open the creaking wooden door of his small cabin, letting in a swirl of snow before quickly closing it behind them. Warmth from the fireplace glowed dimly across the room, casting orange shadows over the rustic interior. The cabin stood near the edge of the pine forest, built decades ago and weathered by years of harsh Colorado winters. Its wooden beams were scratched and faded, and the stone hearth was chipped in places, but the space felt safe. Far safer than the freezing streets Ethan and Lily had wandered through. He set Lily gently onto the worn couch, wrapping her in a thick blanket. Ethan stood near the doorway, his eyes wide as he took in the cabin. For a boy who had slept outside for nights, the simple warmth of the room felt almost unreal. Michael removed his boots and coat, hanging them near the fire to dry. "Make yourselves comfortable," he said, his voice quieter than before, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace settling over them. Ranger trotted inside, shaking snow from his coat before moving to Lily's side. The dog rested his head gently on her lap, letting out a soft whine as if checking on her well-being. Lily smiled, small, tired, but genuine, and placed her hand on the dog's large head. The simple gesture warmed the cabin in a way the fireplace never could. Michael watched them for a moment, his expression softening. The sight tugged at memories he usually tried to bury. His daughter falling asleep on that same couch, the sound of her tiny laughter echoing through the kitchen, the warmth of a family he thought he would never feel again. He shook off the thought and turned to Ethan. "You hungry?" he asked. Ethan nodded shyly. Michael heated the remaining soup on the stove. As it simmered, he noticed Ethan quietly wiping the snow and dirt off the floor near the entrance with his sleeve. "You don't have to do that," Michael said gently. "It's your house," Ethan answered. We don't want to cause trouble." Michael felt something twist inside him again. Respect, gratitude, and sadness all woven together. "You're not trouble," he repeated softly. When the soup was ready, Ethan ate carefully, almost formally, as if afraid to spill even a drop. Lily, still wrapped in the blanket, drifted towards sleep between sips. Michael placed another blanket over her, brushing a stray hair away from her forehead. Later, as Michael stepped outside to bring in firewood, Ethan followed without being asked. The boy grabbed small logs with his thin arms, struggling but determined. "I can help," he said breathlessly. Michael didn't stop him. Instead, he handed Ethan a smaller piece of wood that better fit his size. Together, they stacked the logs neatly beside the stove. Throughout the evening, Ethan continued finding little ways to assist, organizing scattered shoes by the door, folding the blanket Lily had dropped earlier, brushing off the snow clinging to Ranger's fur. These small acts, done with care and respect, stirred something deep inside Michael. After Lily fell asleep, Ethan approached Michael hesitantly. "Thank you for letting us stay," he whispered. His hazel eyes shone with sincerity far beyond his age. Michael nodded, swallowing the tightness in his throat. "It's just for tonight," he said softly, but even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. As the night grew deeper, the storm outside intensified. Wind pounded against the windows, and snow piled high along the porch. The cabin creaked under the pressure, and suddenly Ranger's ears perked. He let out a sharp bark, running toward the back door. Michael opened it slightly and saw the source, The heavy gusts had knocked part of the porch roof loose, leaving a wooden plank dangling dangerously. Ranger barked again, as if urging him to notice. Michael nodded. Good boy. He secured the plank temporarily, making a mental note to fix it properly tomorrow. When he came back inside, Ranger had already returned to Lily, lying protectively beside her. Ethan watched with admiration. He's amazing, the boy said. He's saved my life more times than I can count. Michael replied quietly. He senses things before I do. Ethan nodded as though committing that truth to memory. Later, while Ethan slept near the fire and Lily curled against Ranger, Michael sat alone in his wooden chair. He looked at the two children, at the dog guarding them, and at the warm glow filling the room. For the first time in 2 years, the cabin didn't feel empty. A thought whispered into his mind. Dangerous, hopeful, impossible, yet persistent. Maybe this house could be more. Maybe it could shelter children like Ethan and Lily. Maybe he could give them something he once lost. The idea scared him, but it also warmed him. As Michael stared into the fire, the spark of a new purpose began to form. In the days that followed, Michael found himself waking earlier than usual, often to the sound of Ethan's careful footsteps as the boy gathered firewood or folded blankets without being asked. Lily always sat beside Ranger in the mornings, brushing bits of snow from his fur while humming softly. Their presence filled the cabin with a quiet rhythm, one that made the place feel alive again. One evening, after the children had gone to sleep, Michael remained alone in the living room. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light across the wooden walls. On the small table beside him sat a framed photograph of his wife, Grace, and their little daughter, Emma. Grace had been a gentle woman with soft auburn hair and warm hazel eyes, her laughter a calming melody. Emma, with her blonde curls and bright smile, had adored Ranger and often tried to braid his tail despite Michael's protests. As Michael stared at the photo, memories resurfaced. The accident, the guilt, the unbearable silence that followed. For months he had lived like a ghost, drifting from day to night with no purpose. But now, as he listened to Lily's muffled breathing in the next room and Ethan's gentle snoring, something cracked open inside him. Grace, you would have taken them in without hesitation, he thought. Emma would have shared her blanket with Lily. Tears welled in his eyes. He bowed his head, whispering, I will live for your part too. Both of you. The decision was made. The next morning, Michael began clearing out the storage room, an old space cluttered with spare tools, broken furniture, and dusty boxes. Ethan helped eagerly, hauling away small pieces of wood, while Lily sorted through screws and nails with surprising focus for her age. Ranger stayed at the doorway, his tail wagging as he watched them work. Over the following days, Michael sold several valuable items he had kept untouched since his family's passing. An old hunting rifle, a handcrafted wooden table Grace had once admired, and a pair of antique lamps from his grandparents. Letting these things go tugged at his heart. Yet it also felt strangely cleansing, like peeling away the layers of grief that had kept him frozen. With the money, he bought lumber, insulation, and roofing materials. The cabin echoed with sounds it had not heard in years. Hammers tapping, wood being sawed, tools scraping across the floor. Ethan learned quickly, handing Michael nails, steadying boards, or holding a flashlight when the evenings grew dark. Lily swept sawdust into neat piles or brought cups of warm water during breaks. Ranger played his own role. He dragged fallen branches from the yard, stood guard over the materials, and barked sharply whenever a loose beam creaked too loudly. His instincts were sharp, and he had saved them from a collapsing board more than once. Soon, word began to spread. First, it was Mrs. Sarah Henson from the bakery, who noticed Michael buying large bags of flour and canned food. Sarah was tall and slender, with sharp cheekbones and silver-streaked brown hair, always tied back in a neat bun. Curious and perceptive, she asked, "Are you expecting guests, Michael?" When he hesitated, she pressed gently, "You're helping children, aren't you?" Michael didn't answer directly, but Sarah had lived long enough to read between lines. The next morning, she appeared at his cabin with a basket of warm bread and scarves she no longer used. "For the kids," she said simply before walking away. From there, the news spread quickly through Silverpine. The town was small, and stories traveled faster than the snowstorms that swept through every winter. Soon, others began arriving at Michael's home. A tired social worker needing a temporary place for a child, a neighbor who found a boy sleeping outside a gas station, a woman who heard from a friend that the veteran near the woods would never turn a child away. Within 2 months, the cabin, once almost silent, was filled with the voices of 5 children. But the joy came with mounting challenges. Food disappeared quickly. Firewood was never enough. Repair costs doubled as the old cabin strained to hold so many people. The small savings Michael had left dwindled at an alarming rate, and still he refused to turn any child away. When the pantry finally ran low, Michael tightened his jaw and put on his coat. "I'll find a way," he told Ethan and Lily, though worry clouded his eyes. He planted winter-resistant vegetables behind the cabin, using old gardening skills he hadn't touched since Grace was alive. He repaired an abandoned chicken coop and began raising hens, checking on them every morning before sunrise. When that still wasn't enough, he took on small jobs around town, fixing fences, chopping wood for elderly neighbors, repairing roofs damaged by storms. The work was exhausting. His hands grew blistered, and his shoulders ached each night. But whenever he returned home and saw the children gathered around the fireplace, laughing, drawing pictures, or telling stories, Michael felt a strength rise inside him. He could not give up, not when so many small lives depended on him. And though he did not know it yet, Silverpine was watching and would not stay silent for long. Winter deepened in Silverpine, and though the cabin had become a place of warmth for the children, the strain on Michael grew heavier by the day. He pushed through exhaustion, working long hours to keep everyone fed and warm. Ethan and Lily helped as much as they could, but even their determination couldn't fill the gaps. Storm after storm battered the small town, and the repairs seemed endless. Yet Michael persisted, lifting beams, fixing leaks, reinforcing cracked walls, driven by the quiet promise he had made to Grace and Emma. One morning after a fierce snowfall, Michael stepped outside to clear the path to the woodshed. The snow reached almost to his knees, and the cold bit into his beard and cheeks, stinging like needles. Ethan and Lily followed him, bundled in donated coats from Sarah. Other children soon joined them, eager to help, their breath floating like pale ghosts in the air. Ranger trotted alongside, nose low to the ground, checking for unstable snow before the children stepped forward. Michael hoisted a large wooden plank over his shoulders and began to trudge through the deep snow, leaving heavy footprints behind. Ethan and Lily pushed the snow aside with makeshift shovels, pieces of broken boards Michael had reshaped days earlier. Unknown to them, a young man from the town named Chris Myers stood nearby, watching. Chris was in his early 30s, tall and broad-shouldered from years of working outdoor construction jobs. His dark blonde hair stuck out in all directions beneath a wool cap, and his square jaw was lined with a short, unshaven beard. Chris had a good heart, but carried a quiet loneliness ever since his divorce the previous year, an event that left him yearning to feel connected to something meaningful again. As he observed Michael working through snow with children trailing behind him, something inside Chris shifted. He lifted his phone and began recording. The video captured Michael bracing against the wind, carrying the heavy plank while the children, small, determined, bundled in mismatched winter clothes, cleared a path for him. Ranger walked at their heels, protective and alert. There was no dramatic music, no staging, no planned message, just raw humanity in harsh winter light. Chris uploaded the video to the town's community page. Within hours, messages poured in. By evening, people arrived at the cabin carrying bags, boxes, tools, and warm food. Sarah was the first to knock. She stood tall in her long winter coat, her silver-streaked hair tucked neatly beneath a knitted hat. "I brought bread and stew," she said gently, "and some blankets I don't use anymore." She didn't stay long, but her presence opened the floodgates. Next came Mr. Harris, a carpenter in his 60s with a wiry frame, ash-gray beard, and deep-set eyes that hinted at decades of craftsmanship. He spoke little, but when he looked at the crooked front door, he simply set down his toolbox and said, "I'll fix that." Then appeared Mrs. Collins, owner of the town's small grocery store. She was short and round, with curly chestnut hair and pink cheeks. Her personality was warm and motherly, the kind of woman who remembered every customer's favorite snack. She arrived with bags of canned goods, flour, oats, and fresh fruit. "Kids need to eat well," she said firmly, waving away Michael's protests. A farmer named Dale Turner followed. Dale was tall, with rough hands, sun-worn skin, and a calm, steady presence shaped by years tending fields. He brought a crate of chicken feed, a box of seeds, and 3 young hens. "They'll lay soon," he said quietly. "Good eggs for the little ones." Soon more people came. Neighbors, strangers, church volunteers, some with money, others with jackets, old toys, bedding, or firewood. No contribution was too small, and every gesture fueled Michael's growing hope. Over the next week, the cabin transformed. Mr. Harris repaired the doors, reinforced the windows, and rebuilt the unstable porch. Chris and a few construction workers replaced the roof panels damaged by storms. Sarah brought hot meals every other evening. Dale helped expand the chicken coop behind the cabin. Ranger monitored everything, weaving between workers, sniffing toolboxes, and lying near tired children who needed warmth. The children, too, blossomed. They laughed more, played outside in the snow, chased Ranger through the trees, and helped Michael with simple tasks. Ethan, always responsible, kept the firewood neatly stacked and offered to help anyone who visited. Lily found joy in feeding the hens and often giggled as they pecked gently at her gloves. One afternoon, snow drifted gently from the sky as the final repairs were completed. The cabin looked new, not perfect, but strong and welcoming. Inside, the fireplace glowed warmly, and the children's laughter echoed through every corner. Ethan tugged at Michael's sleeve. Lily stood beside him, her eyes sparkling. Together, they wrapped their arms around him. "Uncle, the house feels warm," Ethan whispered, with a smile full of sincerity and belonging. Michael froze for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. It had been years since anyone called him family. He looked out across the yard, where Ranger sat proudly in the snow, watching over the bustling children. For the first time in 2 long years, Michael felt truly alive. A smile, genuine, unforced, spread across his face. The small cabin on the edge of Colorado's forest was no longer just a house. It was a home, a haven, a place of healing for the children and for Michael. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder, lightning, or angelic choirs. Sometimes, they walk quietly through a snowstorm in Colorado. A weary man carrying a broken heart, a loyal dog guided by instinct, and two children praying simply for warmth. And then, somewhere between pain and hope, God steps in. He doesn't always change the circumstances instantly, but he sends people, ordinary people, to carry out extraordinary acts. Michael didn't expect his life to be restored. Ethan and Lily didn't expect to survive that night. The town didn't expect to come together. But grace arrived anyway, not because they were ready, but because God never stopped watching over them. This story reminds us that in our everyday lives, between grocery trips, morning coffee, and long, quiet nights, there are opportunities for small miracles. A warm meal, a helping hand, a simple act of kindness. These are ways God works through us, turning cold nights into warm homes and lonely hearts into families. So if you're watching this today, remember, you may be the miracle someone is praying for. And no matter how heavy your days feel, God still walks beside you, guiding you gently toward hope. May the Lord bless you, protect you, and surround your home with peace. May He warm every cold corner of your life and heal every silent hurt in your heart. And may you always remember, you are never alone. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need encouragement today. Comment your thoughts or a prayer for those going through difficult times. Subscribe for more heartwarming stories of kindness, hope, and God's quiet miracles in everyday life. And may God bless each and every one of you watching this. Thank you for being part of this journey. May His grace be upon you always.